Justice is supposed to be blind, but in the mahogany-paneled courtroom of Judge Arthur Harrington, it had 20/20 vision for prejudice. On a sweltering August afternoon, a powerful decorated judge stared down from his bench at what he saw as just another statistic, a frightened black teenager, David Cheneau, accused of a crime that would steal his future. In the gallery sat the boy's only supporter, a young man slouched in a hoodie, head bobbing to music only he could hear. The judge saw a thug. The prosecutor saw a nuisance. They were both about to learn a lesson in humility so profound it would shatter their world. What happens when the system's deepest flaws come face to face with a secret genius it never saw coming? The air in courtroom 4B of the Franklin County Courthouse was thick and stagnant, heavy with the scent of old paper, cheap polish, and quiet desperation. This was the domain of the Honorable Judge Arthur Harrington, a man whose silver hair was as immaculate as his reputation among the city's old guard. For 30 years he had presided over this room, his gavel falling like a guillotine on the lives of those he deemed unworthy. His portrait hanging just outside the doors showed a man with a stern but supposedly fair gaze. Inside the courtroom, however, that gaze had curdled into something else, a permanent, weary condescension. Today's docket was in his mind depressingly typical. The defendant was a 19-year-old named David Cheneau. He was a tall, lanky kid with eyes that darted around the room, absorbing the imposing woodwork and the cold indifference of the court officers. He looked less like a hardened criminal and more like a boy who'd been summoned to the principal's office for a crime he couldn't even comprehend. The charge was serious grand larceny and corporate espionage. The prosecution, led by the ambitious Assistant District Attorney Robert Parker, alleged that David, a night shift janitor at the high-tech finance firm Ethelred Capital, had used his access to install a keylogger on a senior executive's computer, siphoning off $250,000 in sensitive algorithmic trading data. The evidence was on the surface damning. The breach was traced to a specific terminal logged in with David's credentials, and a portion of the stolen money was found deposited into a newly opened bank account in his name. David was represented by Sarah Jenkins, a public defender with 5 years of experience, which was just enough to make her capable, but not enough to extinguish the exhaustion in her eyes. She was juggling 7 other felony cases, and the file for the People versus Cheneau was a mountain of technical jargon and financial documents she barely had time to skim, let alone master. Judge Harrington peered down over his spectacles. "Ms. Jenkins," he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that demanded attention. "Is your client prepared to enter a plea? The DA's office has offered a deal. 10 years. Given the evidence, I'd say that's quite charitable. It saves the taxpayers a great deal of time and money." Sarah stood shuffling her papers. "Your Honor, my client maintains his absolute innocence. We are not taking any plea. We are ready to proceed." Harrington sighed, a theatrical display of impatience. He leaned back in his leather chair, a throne he had occupied for decades. "Very well. Your client's prerogative, I suppose." He glanced at David, a flicker of disdain in his eyes. Another young man with a bright future ahead, throwing it all away. His gaze then drifted to the public gallery. It was mostly empty, save for a few law students and one other figure. Slumped in the third row was a young black man, probably around the same age as the defendant. He wore baggy jeans, a dark gray hoodie with the hood pulled up, and large, expensive-looking headphones over his ears. His head nodded slightly as if to the beat of some silent, defiant anthem. To Harrington, he was the physical embodiment of everything wrong with the youth of today, disrespectful, disengaged, and radiating an aura of casual contempt for the institution Harrington held sacred. And who, may I ask, is that Harrington's voice cut through the room, pointing his chin toward the gallery? All eyes turned to the young man in the hoodie. He didn't seem to notice at first. "Sir," a bailiff barked, "the judge is addressing you." Headphones off in the courtroom, the young man slowly pulled the headphones down, letting them rest around his neck. He looked up, his expression unreadable, almost bored. "You talking to me?" he asked, his voice quiet. Harrington's lips tightened into a thin line. "I am. This is a court of law, not a concert hall. State your name and your purpose for being here." "Leo Hayes. I'm a friend of the family." "A friend of the family." Harrington repeated, savoring the words as if they were a particularly sour candy. He looked from Leo's street attire to the terrified David Chanot, then to the beleaguered Sarah Jenkins. The picture in his mind was complete. Ms. Jenkins, is this individual assisting you? Perhaps he's your street-level investigator. A few of the court staff chuckled. 8DA? Parker cracked a smirk. Sarah Jenkins flushed with embarrassment. No, Your Honor. He's just here for moral support for David. Moral support, Harrington mused, his eyes locking onto Leo. Son, the kind of morals your friend is accused of violating are the kind that land people in federal prison for a very long time. Perhaps you should take this as a teachable moment. Observe the proceedings, see how the gears of justice turn, and choose a different path for yourself. Leo's expression didn't change. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and leaned back in his seat, pulling his hood further over his face. He didn't put his headphones back on. He just watched. The judge, satisfied that he had made his point and re-established the pecking order in his kingdom, turned back to the business at hand. Mr. Parker, you may begin your opening statement. As Robert Parker strode to the lectern, radiating confidence, Leo Hayes leaned forward slightly. His eyes, sharp and intensely focused, missed nothing. He wasn't listening to a beat anymore. He was listening for the lie. He watched Parker paint a picture of a cunning, greedy young man who exploited a position of trust. He watched the jury, a panel of mostly white middle-class citizens, absorb the narrative. He watched Sarah Jenkins scribble frantic notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. And most of all, he watched Judge Harrington, who presided over it all, not like a neutral arbiter of the law, but like a bored king eager to be done with the unpleasantness and pass his foregone conclusion of a sentence. Leo knew the type. He had studied men like Harrington his entire life, men who confused their position with wisdom, their prejudice with judgment. The judge had mocked him, dismissed him as a hoodlum. He had no idea who Leo Hayes was. He had no idea that the young man in the hoodie had passed the New York State bar exam at the age of 18, graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law at 20, and was currently the most sought-after legal prodigy in the country, known in elite circles as a ghost, a phantom attorney who specialized in taking on impossible cases. And he had certainly no idea that Leo was not just here for moral support. He was here to hunt. The first day of the trial was a masterclass in prosecutorial momentum. ADA. Parker, a man who knew how to weave a compelling story for a jury, was in his element. He called a parade of witnesses from Ethelred Capital, each one adding another brick to the wall of guilt being built around David Chanot. First came the head of HR, a stern woman named Clarice, who testified that David had access to the entire floor as part of his cleaning duties. Then came the IT security chief, a fast-talking tech expert named Ben, who presented digital logs that seemed to irrefutably place David at the compromised computer terminal at the exact time of the illegal transfer. He used complex terms like packet sniffing and IP spoofing, but boiled it down for the jury. The hack came from inside the house from that specific machine, while Mr. Chanot was the only one with authorized access to the physical space. Judge Harrington listened with rapt attention when Ben testified, nodding along, as if he understood every nuance of cybersecurity. But when Sarah Jenkins stood to cross-examine, his patience wore thin almost immediately. Mr. Ben, Sarah began, is it not possible that someone could have remotely accessed that terminal? Highly unlikely, Ben scoffed. Our firewalls are state-of-the-art. We have a multi-million-dollar security infrastructure. But not impossible, Sarah pressed. Anything is possible, ma'am. It's possible an alien zapped the money out of our servers. But all the evidence points to a physical breach via a keylogger. From the gallery, Leo Hayes watched his jaw tight. Sarah was asking the right questions, but she didn't have the technical knowledge to challenge the answers. She didn't know how to ask about VPNs, about MAC address cloning, or about the vulnerabilities in the specific brand of firewall Ethelred, used vulnerabilities Leo had read about in a white paper just 6 months prior. Next, Parker called Preston Caldwell, the chief financial officer of Ethelred Capital, to the stand. Caldwell was the picture of corporate power-tailored suit, a Rolex that gleamed under the courtroom lights, and an air of aggrieved authority. He was the victim, the man whose computer had been compromised. It was a profound violation, Caldwell said, his voice smooth and practiced. Not just of my privacy, but of the trust we place in our staff. We pride ourselves on being a family at Ethelred. To have that trust shattered by him. He glanced at David with a look of pure disappointment, a look that was more damning than any accusation. During Sarah's cross-examination of Caldwell, the CFO ran circles around her. She tried to probe into the company's financial health, suggesting someone else might have had a motive. Ms. Jenkins, Judge Harrington interrupted, his voice dripping with annoyance. What is the relevance of this line of questioning? Are you suggesting Mr. Caldwell, the victim of the crime, robbed himself? Let's stick to the facts of this case, shall we? I'm trying to establish motive, Your Honor. The motive has been established. Harrington cut her off. $250,000. That's a powerful motive for a young man from Mr. Chenot's background. Let's move on. The phrase "from Mr. Chenot's background" hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Leo felt a cold fury rise in his chest. The judge wasn't even trying to hide his bias. He was essentially directing the jury on how to think. The final witness of the day was the bank manager who confirmed the large deposit into a new account in David's name. On paper, it was an open and shut case. As the court recessed for the day, David looked utterly defeated, his head in his hands. Sarah Jenkins packed her briefcase. Her shoulders slumped. As she walked out of the courtroom, Leo fell into step beside her in the crowded hallway. He's railroading you, Leo said, his voice low. Sarah jumped, startled. She looked at the young man from the gallery. Look, I appreciate the support for David, but I have this under control. Do you? Leo challenged, his tone not accusatory, but factual. You let the IT guy get away with defining the entire digital crime scene. You didn't ask him about remote desktop protocols or whether the server logs had been audited for tampering by a third party. You didn't subpoena Ethelred's internal financial audits from the last quarter to see if Caldwell's department was underperforming. Sarah stopped and stared at him. Who are you, a friend? Leo said simply. Caldwell wasn't the victim. He was the target, but not the target of the theft. The theft was the distraction. Someone wanted access to his machine for another reason. The money was just misdirection. He scribbled something on a piece of paper from her notepad. It was a string of technical questions. Ask the IT guy this tomorrow, Leo said. Ask him if there's system logs, timestamps in UTC or local time, and if he personally verified the NTP server sync. Then ask him if Caldwell's machine has a history of remote connections from any internal IP addresses not assigned to his known devices. Sarah looked at the note, then back at Leo, bewildered. How do you know all this? I read, Leo said. He then pulled his hood back up and melted into the throng of people leaving the courthouse. The next day, the atmosphere was even more tense. Parker was confident, believing he was on the verge of a swift victory. Sarah Jenkins, however, seemed to have a renewed, if nervous, energy. She recalled the IT chief Ben to the stand for further cross-examination, much to Judge Harrington's visible irritation. Ms. Jenkins, are we on a fishing expedition? Now the judge sighed. Ignoring him, Sarah took a deep breath and looked at her notes, Leo's notes. Mr. Ben, yesterday you testified that the logs were airtight. Can you tell the court if your system logs timestamps in coordinated universal time or in the local time zone? Ben blinked, thrown off. UTC, it's standard practice. And did you personally verify the network time protocol server synchronization for the period in question to ensure there was no temporal drift? Ben's confidence faltered. I mean, the system does that automatically. So no, you didn't personally verify it, Sarah stated. Next question. Did you run a forensic analysis on Mr. Caldwell's machine for a history of remote desktop connections originating from within Ethelred's own network? Parker shot to his feet. Objection. Your Honor. Relevance. Your Honor. Sarah countered, her voice stronger now. The prosecution's entire case rests on the idea that this was a physical hack. I am attempting to prove it could have been digital and initiated by another employee. Before Harrington could shut her down, Ben answered a little too quickly. There were no unauthorized remote connections. Leo, watching from the gallery, knew that was a lie. He had run a preliminary deep web search on Ethelred's network architecture. It was riddled with holes a competent internal actor could exploit. But Sarah didn't have the technical prowess to catch the lie. She had used up the ammunition Leo gave her and didn't know how to follow up. Her cross-examination fizzled out. She looked defeated. Judge Harrington leaned forward, a smug smile playing on his lips. He looked directly at the gallery at Leo. Ms. Jenkins, the judge said, his voice booming with mock sympathy. It seems your newfound technical expertise has run its course. Perhaps you should advise your little friend in the gallery that watching television crime dramas does not an expert make. The courtroom erupted in sycophantic laughter. Parker sat down grinning. Leo Hayes simply stared back at the judge, his face a mask of stone. He slowly and deliberately took a pen and a small notebook from his pocket. The judge had escalated. He had moved from subtle bias to open mockery, not just of the defendant, but of anyone associated with him. He was enjoying the humiliation, basking in his power. Leo clicked his pen. The time for observation was over. The time for detonation was about to begin. The breaking point came during the defense's case-in-chief, which was crumbling before it even began. Sarah Jenkins called David Cheneau to the stand. His testimony was heartfelt and believable, but under Parker's merciless cross-examination, he became flustered and confused. Parker twisted his words, making his simple explanations sound like the convoluted lies of a guilty man. So, Mr. Cheneau, Parker sneered, you just happened to be cleaning near the CFO's office for an unusually long time that night, and you just happened to have a brand new bank account, and $50,000 just happened to appear in it. What a string of coincidences. I didn't do it. I don't know how the money got there. David pleaded, his voice cracking. Judge Harrington watched impassive. He offered no protection to the witness, allowing Parker to badger and belittle him. It was then that Sarah Jenkins made her final desperate move. She tried to introduce an expert witness, a cybersecurity analyst she had managed to consult overnight. We object, Your Honor, Parker said smoothly. The defense failed to notify us of this witness in the allotted time frame. It's a transparent attempt at a last-minute ambush. Ms. Jenkins Harrington's voice was cold as ice. Your Honor, this evidence is crucial. It's exculpatory. It speaks directly to my client's innocence. Sarah argued, her voice trembling with frustration. Rules are rules, Counselor Harrington said with an air of finality. This isn't a free-for-all. You had months to prepare. The witness will not be heard. Your motion is denied. He banged his gavel lightly, a punctuation mark on her defeat. Sarah Jenkins stood at the lectern, utterly broken. She had nothing left. The case was lost. David Cheneau was going to prison. In the third row of the gallery, Leo Hayes slowly stood up. The movement was quiet, but in the tense silence of the courtroom, it was as loud as a gunshot. Every head turned. The bailiff instinctively moved towards him. Sir, sit down. Judge Harrington's eyes narrowed into slits of pure fury. This was the ultimate sign of disrespect in his kingdom. Mr. Hayes, you are now disrupting a federal proceeding. You are in contempt of court. Bailiff, remove this man. Let him spend a night in a cell to contemplate the meaning of respect. The bailiff reached for Leo's arm, but Leo didn't flinch. He didn't look at the bailiff. His eyes were locked on Judge Harrington, and for the first time the bored street kid facade was gone. His eyes burned with an intensity that made the judge pause. Your Honor, Leo said, his voice calm, clear, and resonant, utterly devoid of the slang or mumble he'd used before. Before you have me removed, I strongly advise you to read Rule 614A of the Federal Rules of Evidence, which grants the court on its own motion the authority to call witnesses not called by a party, especially when it serves the interest of justice, an interest you seem to have forgotten. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. The legal jargon delivered with such precision was jarringly out of place coming from the kid in the hoodie. ADA Parker stared, his mouth slightly agape. Sarah Jenkins looked back at Leo, her eyes wide with disbelief. Harrington was taken aback but quickly recovered his bluster. Are you trying to lecture me on the law? Son, you have no standing here. You are a spectator. Now get out or I will make you regret it. On the contrary, Your Honor, I have more standing here than you know, Leo said, taking a step forward into the aisle. He reached into the inner pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He walked calmly past the frozen bailiff, past the counsel tables, and stopped directly before the clerk's station below the judge's bench. He opened the wallet and produced two items. One was a driver's license. The other was a small, crisp card. He placed them on the clerk's desk. My name is Leonard Hayes, Esquire, he declared, his voice ringing with authority. Attorney number 55789 Unjo, a member in good standing of the New York State Bar. And this, he said, sliding a thick document from a folder he was now holding, is a motion for admission pro hac vice to appear as co-counsel for the defendant, Mr. David Chanot. It has been signed by my client and by current counsel, Ms. Jenkins. He had given the form to Sarah that morning, telling her it was a long shot, but to sign it just in case. She had thinking it was a meaningless gesture. Now she understood. The clerk, a woman who had seen everything, picked up the bar card, her eyes wide. She examined it, then looked at the motion, then back at the young man who stood before her. Judge Harrington leaned forward, his face a mask of purple-tinged disbelief. He looked as though he had been struck by lightning. He snatched the bar card from his clerk's hand. He stared at it, his mind refusing to process the information. Leonard Hayes Esquimer. The photo matched the face of the young man he had belittled and mocked. This is a joke. A forgery, Harrington stammered. Run the number, Your Honor, Leo said coolly. You will find I was admitted 2 years ago. You will also find that I clerked for Judge Beverly Chen at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm sure you know her. She speaks very highly of your early work. The mention of Judge Chen, a widely respected and famously incorruptible federal appellate judge, was like a physical blow to Harrington. The name drop wasn't just a credential, it was a warning. The courtroom was a tomb. The jury was staring, utterly captivated. ADA Parker looked pale, as if he'd seen a ghost. He was prosecuting a case against a kid being defended by one of the most brilliant young legal minds in the nation, who had been playing possum the entire time. Leo turned to the defendant's table. David, do you consent to my representation? David, looking from Leo to the sputtering judge, nodded dumbly. Yes. Ms. Jenkins Sarah, shaking off her shock, found her voice. Yes, we welcome Mr. Hayes as lead counsel. Leo turned back to the bench. His demeanor was no longer that of a supplicant. It was the demeanor of a predator that had just cornered its prey. Your Honor. Leo said, his voice sharp as a razor. According to the law, you have no legitimate grounds to deny my motion. I have a client who wants my representation local counsel to sponsor me, and I am a member in good standing of a state bar. Therefore, I will be taking over the defense of Mr. Chanot. My first act will be to file a motion for a mistrial on the grounds of pervasive and demonstrable judicial bias, which has irrevocably tainted these proceedings and prejudiced the jury against my client. Judge Harrington stared at him, his face ashen. The thug from the gallery was gone. In his place stood a legal titan in disguise. He had mocked him, insulted him, and threatened him. And now that same young man held his entire career in the palm of his hand. The king in his own courtroom had just been checkmated. The 15-minute recess Judge Harrington reluctantly granted felt like an eternity. He sat in his chambers, the door locked, the silence buzzing with the frequency of his own humiliation. He had his clerk frantically verify Leo Hayes' credentials. The report came back, and it was worse than he could have imagined. Not only was it all true, but Leonard Hayes was a legend in legal academia, a prodigy. His law review article on digital evidence and the Fourth Amendment was already being cited in federal court opinions. Harrington had not just mocked a lawyer, he had mocked a phenomenon. His motion to deny the pro hac vice admission would be overturned on appeal so fast it would create a sonic boom, and the charge of judicial bias would stick like tar. He had no choice. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had undergone a seismic shift. Leo Hayes was no longer in the gallery. He stood at the defense table, having shed his hoodie and jeans. Underneath, he had been wearing a crisp button-down shirt. He'd retrieved a tailored blazer and a somber tie from a messenger bag he'd checked with the bailiffs. The transformation was absolute. He looked sharp, focused, and lethal. Judge Harrington, looking 10 years older, cleared his throat. The court grants the motion for Mr. Hayes to appear as counsel for the defendant. However, the motion for a mistrial is denied at this time. Proceed, Mr. Hayes. His voice was flat, defeated. Thank you, Your Honor, Leo said, his tone devoid of triumph. It was all business. The defense would like to recall the prosecution's IT witness, Mr. Ben, to the stand. Parker shot up. Objection. This witness has been examined and cross-examined. For matters arising from his previous testimony, Your Honor, Leo countered smoothly. New counsel has the right to address the evidence presented. Furthermore, I intend to question him as a hostile witness regarding new evidence the previous counsel was not equipped to address. I'll allow it, Harrington grumbled, wanting to get the ordeal over with. Ben returned to the stand, but his smug confidence had evaporated. He was now facing the architect of the questions that had tripped him up earlier, and he knew he was out of his depth. Leo approached the witness stand, not with the aggression of Parker, but with the calm, dissecting precision of a surgeon. Mr. Ben, let's return to our discussion of remote access, Leo began. You stated definitively that there were no unauthorized remote connections to Mr. Caldwell's machine. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Are you familiar with a remote administration tool called Ethel Connect? Ben paled slightly. It's a proprietary tool our in-house development team created for remote IT support. Precisely, Leo said. A tool that wouldn't show up on a standard scan for unauthorized third-party software like TeamViewer or VNC. Because to the system it is authorized, it's an internal tool. Now this tool, Ethel Connect, does it create a detailed access log with the source IP address of the connecting technician? Yes, of course, Ben said, shifting in his seat. And did you review that log for the 24-hour period surrounding the breach? I saw no reason to. It's for IT use only. So you're the head of IT security, Leo said, letting the words hang in the air. And you didn't check the logs of a powerful system-level remote access tool during the investigation of a digital theft. That seems negligent, doesn't it? Parker was on his feet again. Objection, counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Harrington mumbled, though his heart wasn't in it. Leo didn't miss a beat. Let me rephrase. Mr. Ben, would it surprise you to learn that at 2:17 a.m. on the night of the theft, a connection was made to Mr. Caldwell's computer using Ethel Connect, a connection that lasted exactly 14 minutes, the precise duration of the data transfer and financial transaction? Ben was sweating now. That's impossible. I would have seen it. Oh, you would have, Leo agreed, if you had been looking. But perhaps someone with administrator privileges, someone like you, for instance, could delete a single entry from a log file. Couldn't they? Objection, Parker yelled. Counsel is making baseless accusations. On the contrary, Leo said, turning to the judge. The defense would like to introduce into evidence Exhibit D. He nodded to Sarah Jenkins, who, acting as second chair, handed a file to the clerk. This is a certified, unaltered snapshot of Ethelred Capital's server taken at 7:00 a.m., the morning after the theft, pursuant to a private civil warrant obtained by my firm last week. It was executed by a forensic data recovery team who imaged the hard drives, including the so-called unallocated clusters, the digital ghosts of deleted files. Please turn to page 47 of the report, Mr. Ben. Ben's face went white as a sheet. He knew what was in unallocated clusters. Leo continued, his voice like a hammer striking an anvil. You will see the remnants of a deleted log entry, a connection via Ethel Connect originating from IP address 10.1.178. Could you please tell the court, Mr. Ben, who that IP address is assigned to? Ben stared at the document, his body trembling. He looked at Parker for help, but the prosecutor could only stare back, horrified. Answer the question. Mr. Ben, Judge Harrington ordered, a flicker of his old authority returning as he saw a new target for his wrath. Ben's voice was a barely audible whisper. It's assigned to my workstation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The jury members leaned forward, their expressions transformed from boredom to shock. So let me reconstruct the events of that night for you, Leo said, his voice filling the room. You didn't need a physical keylogger. You used your own IT support tool to remotely access your boss's computer. You initiated the transfer, both the money and the data. You created a new bank account in Mr. Chenot's name, a simple task for someone with access to the employee database, which contains social security numbers and other personal information. You planted the money there to create the perfect patsy, a young black janitor. Who would ever believe him over the head of IT security? And then you deleted the single log entry that would have exposed you. But you're not a forensic expert, Mr. Ben. You didn't know how to digitally bleach the drive. You left a ghost in the machine. Leo took a step back. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor. Ben looked like he was about to faint. Parker, speechless, simply said, no redirect. Judge Harrington stared at the witness. Bailiff, take Mr. Ben into custody. He is to be held on suspicion of perjury and tampering with evidence. As the bailiffs led the whimpering IT chief away, the entire case had been turned on its head. David Cheneau was no longer the villain, but Leo knew the story wasn't over. Ben was a pawn. He had the technical skill, but not the motive to steal Ethelred's complex trading algorithms. He was just the man who pulled the trigger. Leo now had to find the man who gave the order. With the prosecution's star witness arrested and their entire technical case obliterated, a palpable sense of chaos filled the courtroom. ADA Parker, deeply shaken, requested a recess to reevaluate the state's position, a legal euphemism for figure out what on earth just happened. Judge Harrington granted it, looking dazed. During the break, Leo and Sarah sat with David in a small conference room. David was crying, but for the first time they were tears of relief. "I don't understand," David said, wiping his eyes. "Why would Ben do that to me? I barely even knew him." "He didn't do it for himself," Leo said, his gaze distant, already piecing together the next move. "An IT guy like Ben doesn't have a market for sophisticated trading algorithms. Stealing $250,000 is one thing, but the data he took is worth hundreds of times that to the right buyer. He was a proxy, a tool." "So who was he working for?" Sarah asked, looking at Leo with unadulterated awe. "Think about it," Leo explained. "The entire crime was designed not just to steal, but to frame David. The frame had to be perfect. Who benefits most if Ethelred Capital is crippled by the loss of its proprietary data? A competitor. And who has the motive to not only steal the data, but also create an internal mess to cover their tracks and slow down the discovery?" His eyes narrowed. The crime wasn't the theft from Caldwell's computer. The crime was against Caldwell's computer. The data was the target. The money was the frame. Ben was the instrument. But who orchestrated it? When court resumed, Leo didn't rest on his laurels. He did something no one expected. He called a new witness to the stand. The defense calls Preston Caldwell. Parker, now looking completely out of his depth, weakly objected. "Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell has already testified as a witness for the prosecution regarding the theft," Leo countered. "I am calling him as a hostile witness for the defense regarding matters of corporate conduct and motive. The jury has now heard evidence that Mr. Caldwell was not robbed by Mr. Cheneau. They deserve to know the full context of what was truly taken from him and why." Harrington, seeing the tide of justice turning so fiercely and perhaps fearing further accusations of bias, waved a weary hand. "Proceed, Mr. Hayes." Preston Caldwell returned to the stand, but his demeanor of aggrieved authority was gone. It was replaced by a tense, guarded caution. He eyed Leo as if he were a venomous snake. Leo began calmly circling the topic before moving in for the kill. "Mr. Caldwell, could you please describe for the jury the nature of the data that was stolen from your computer?" "Not the money, the data." Caldwell cleared his throat. "It was, proprietary information, trading algorithms." "Algorithms for what specifically?" Leo pressed. "High-frequency derivatives trading? And these algorithms, codenamed Project Chimera, weren't they the cornerstone of Ethelred's new market strategy set to launch next month?" "Yes," Caldwell admitted, his jaw tight. "And isn't it true that Ethelred's main competitor, a rival firm named Beringer Financial, has been trying to break into that specific market for years?" "Objection," Parker said almost by reflex. "Speculation." Overruled, Harrington snapped, now fascinated by the unfolding drama. Caldwell sneered. "I'm sure they have. It's a competitive business." "It certainly is," Leo agreed. He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Mr. Caldwell, do you have a brother named Julian Caldwell?" Caldwell froze. The question came so far out of left field that it visibly stunned him. "Yes. What does my family have to do with this?" "Your brother, Julian Caldwell. He is a senior vice president at Beringer Financial, is he not?" The blood drained from Preston Caldwell's face. The jury murmured amongst themselves. Parker looked at his notes, then at Caldwell, a dawning horror on his face. He had been played. "They're a rival firm," Caldwell sputtered. "My relationship with my brother is strained. We are not close." "Strained?" Leo asked, raising an eyebrow. Is that why you met with him for lunch at the Oak Haven Country Club 2 weeks before the theft, and again for drinks just 3 days prior? I have no idea what you're talking about. Then allow me to refresh your memory, Leo said, nodding to Sarah. Defense Exhibit E. Sarah produced a set of photographs. They were grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Preston Caldwell and another man laughing together at a restaurant. And Exhibit F. More documents. These are credit card statements subpoenaed from your accounts showing charges at the Oak Haven Club on those exact dates. Harrington leaned forward, his own membership at the Oak Haven Club suddenly feeling like a liability. He knew the Caldwells. He had played golf with their father for years. The pieces were clicking into place for him too, and they were terrifying. Leo advanced towards the witness stand. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. Here's a different story for the jury, Mr. Caldwell. Your company was failing. Not Ethelred, but your division. You were over-leveraged and about to post catastrophic losses. You were going to be fired disgraced. So you made a deal with your brother at the rival company. You would sell him Project Chimera Ethelred's crown jewels. Caldwell was shaking his head mute. But you couldn't just have the data disappear, Leo continued, his voice rising. Ethelred would launch an investigation and they'd find you. So you needed a plan. You needed chaos. A scapegoat. You coerced your head of IT. Ben, perhaps by threatening to expose his own minor infractions, perhaps by offering him a cut to perform the hack from the inside. You instructed him to steal the money and, more importantly, the data, and you told him exactly who to frame: the night janitor, the invisible man, the boy no one would ever believe. This is a fantasy, a lie, Caldwell roared, finding his voice. Is it? Leo shot back. Then can you explain Defense Exhibit G? He held up a final document. This is a wire transfer confirmation from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, dated the day after the theft. A deposit of $5 million into an account held by a shell corporation. A shell corporation that, through 2 layers of ownership, is controlled by none other than you, Mr. Preston Caldwell. The payment originated from a holding company owned by Beringer Financial. Caldwell stared at the paper as if it were his own death warrant. The elaborate construction of his crime, his perfect betrayal, had been dismantled in open court by a young man he wouldn't have even noticed on the street. You sold your company out to your brother to save your own skin, Leo declared, his voice ringing with righteous fury. And to cover your tracks, you were willing to sacrifice the life of an innocent 19-year-old boy, David Chenot, condemning him to a decade in prison without a second thought. Leo turned away from the shattered man on the stand and faced the jury. The defense rests, Your Honor. The air in the courtroom, once thick with tension, was now utterly still. Parker's concession had sucked the very breath from the room, leaving a vacuum in its wake. Judge Harrington, looking down from his bench, seemed to shrink inside his robes. He had lost control not just of the proceedings, but of reality itself. He gave the jury their instructions in a clipped, monotone voice, the words sounding hollow and foreign in his own ears. The jury filed out, but it was a mere formality, a procedural ghost dance. No one in that room had any doubt about the outcome. Less than 10 minutes later, a knock came from the jury room door. They filed back, in their faces a mixture of indignation on behalf of the defendant and awe at the drama they had just witnessed. The foreman, a middle-aged woman who had looked upon David with suspicion just yesterday, now refused to even glance in the judge's direction. She handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Harrington's hand trembled as he read it. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. In the matter of the People versus Chenot, on the charge of grand larceny, we the jury find the defendant. He paused, unable to push the final words out. The foreman spoke up, her voice clear and strong, cutting through his hesitation. We find the defendant not guilty. The words landed like a thunderclap. David Chenot, who had been sitting ramrod straight, finally crumbled. A great shuddering sob escaped him as the weight of the last few months lifted from his shoulders in a single crushing wave. He buried his face in his hands, tears of pure, unadulterated relief streaming through his fingers. Sarah Jenkins, her own eyes glistening, wrapped a protective arm around him, her professionalism momentarily forgotten in the face of such a profound human victory. The gallery erupted into a cacophony of hushed murmurs and the frantic scratching of reporters' pens. This was no longer just a court case. It was a legend in the making. Harrington banged his gavel weakly, a pathetic attempt to restore an order he had already annihilated. Order. This court will have order. It was into this fragile, chaotic moment that Leo Hayes stood once more. He was calm, his posture perfect, a pillar of stillness in the swirling storm. "Your Honor," he began, his voice cutting through the noise with chilling precision. The room fell silent again, anticipating the final blow. "Before this court is formally adjourned and with my client's full consent, I wish to inform you and all parties present that my office is, as of this moment, filing a formal and extensive complaint with the State Commission on Judicial Conduct." Harrington's head snapped up, his eyes wide with animal fear. Leo continued, his voice a steady, deliberate indictment. "This complaint will cite the clear and demonstrable evidence of extreme judicial bias, which has irrevocably tainted these proceedings. It will detail your suppression of exculpatory evidence and your repeated public mockery of both the defendant and his counsel designed to prejudice the jury. Furthermore, it will petition for an immediate and thorough investigation into your conflict of interest, specifically your long-standing personal and financial associations with the Caldwell family and other key members of the Oak Haven Country Club, many of whom have been parties or material witnesses in cases you have presided over." Leo took a step forward, his eyes locking with the judge's. "Finally, Your Honor, we will be petitioning the Commission to expand their investigation beyond this single case to conduct a full audit of your rulings over the last 10 years, with a specific focus on cases involving indigent or minority defendants who were given court-appointed counsel. We believe your conduct here was not an anomaly, but the arrogant culmination of a long-established pattern. We seek your immediate recusal from the bench pending the outcome of this investigation." He had laid it all bare. Not just the mistakes of one trial, but the potential corruption of a career. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a purifier, and he was burning the rot out of this courthouse. Judge Arthur Harrington was speechless. His face, which had cycled through disbelief and anger, was now a slack, ashen mask of pure horror. He looked around the courtroom at the jury, staring at him with contempt at the reporters who looked like sharks that had scented blood at the clerk who refused to meet his gaze. His kingdom had not just fallen, its very foundations had been revealed to be sand. This court is adjourned." He finally choked out, his voice a strangled croak. He slammed the gavel down with such force that it bounced off the block, and he all but fled through the door to his chambers, his black robe billowing behind him like the tattered flag of a defeated army. The aftermath was an inferno. The story of the hoodie lawyer went viral, a modern-day fable of David and Goliath. News trucks formed a veritable siege line around the courthouse. National media outlets picked up the story, splashing Leo's and Harrington's faces across millions of screens. Headlines screamed from news sites, "Justice in a hoodie," "How a genius in disguise exposed a corrupt judge," and "Ethelred conspiracy corporate titans," and "Biased judge tried to frame an innocent teen." The hard karma Leo had set in motion was relentless and absolute. Preston and Julian Caldwell, stripped of their power and prestige, were arrested in a highly publicized raid. Their strained relationship devolved into a bitter cacophony of blame during interrogations, each brother desperately trying to paint the other as the mastermind. It was useless. Leo's evidence was a steel trap. Their trial was swift, their guilt undeniable. The image of the two brothers in ill-fitting suits being sentenced to 15 years each in federal prison became a symbol of corporate greed's ultimate price. Ben, the IT technician, cooperated fully. In tearful testimony, he detailed how Caldwell had cornered him using a past minor indiscretion as leverage to force his compliance. His full confession and assistance earned him a dramatically reduced sentence, but he would forever live with the shame of having been the tool of such a monstrous injustice. ADA Robert Parker suffered a quieter, but no less profound professional death. He was quietly demoted to a desk job in the archives, his once bright career path permanently extinguished. The humiliation wasn't just in the demotion, it was in the knowledge that his ambition and laziness had made him a willing pawn. He had almost built his career on the ruins of an innocent man's life, and that was a stain that would never wash away. But the most spectacular downfall was that of Arthur Harrington. The Commission on Judicial Conduct, spurred by the media frenzy and Leo's meticulously documented complaint, launched the most aggressive investigation in its history. Leo's call for others to come forward opened a floodgate, An avalanche of complaints from other lawyers and defendants painted a damning portrait of a judge who ruled by prejudice. They uncovered the deep financial ties to his country club cronies, revealing case after case where his rulings had suspiciously benefited his friends. He was suspended indefinitely. To avoid the ultimate humiliation of impeachment, he was forced into a disgrace-fueled retirement. The final indignity came on a quiet Tuesday morning. A maintenance worker arrived outside courtroom 4B, set up a ladder and carefully removed the large gilded portrait of Judge Arthur Harrington from the wall. There was no ceremony. It was simply taken down, leaving behind a faded rectangular silhouette on the wallpaper, the ghost of a legacy that had been built on arrogance and had crumbled into dust. Harrington lived out his days as a recluse in his sprawling silent mansion, a king without a kingdom, haunted by the memory of the young man in the hoodie he had so disastrously underestimated. Amid the wreckage, new life began. David Cheneau received a multi-million-dollar settlement from the now restructured Ethelred Capital. But the money was secondary. What he had truly won back was his future. He enrolled in a top-tier university majoring in computer science and cybersecurity. He was determined to master the very systems that had been used to try and destroy him, to spend his life building walls, to protect people, not framing them. And Leo Hayes. He vanished from the public eye as mysteriously as he had appeared. He declined interviews, ignored offers for book deals, and faded back into the shadows. For Leo, the fame was a dangerous side effect, not a reward. He knew that the moment he became a celebrity, he would lose his greatest weapon, the ability to be underestimated, to be the ghost in the machine. He returned to his quiet, relentless work, seeking out other forgotten courtrooms and other unwinnable cases, forever committed to being the unseen, unexpected instrument of justice. The incredible story of Leo Hayes and Judge Harrington is a powerful reminder that our legal system is only as strong as the people who inhabit it. It shows how easily prejudice can poison the well of justice, but also how the courage and brilliance of one person can restore its purity. This wasn't just a courtroom drama. It's a mirror reflecting the hidden biases that can infect our most sacred institutions, and a testament to the fact that true authority comes from integrity, not a title or a gavel. The hard karma that found Judge Harrington wasn't supernatural. It was simply the consequence of his own actions, brought to light by someone he was conditioned to underestimate. If this story moved you, and if you believe in the fight for true blind justice, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video to spread the message that accountability is for everyone, no matter how powerful. And be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell for more unforgettable stories of karma, genius, and the incredible twists of fate that reveal the truth. Let us know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most.